Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishna Jagat Gurum Pada Padme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So today we'll be discussing about the the events that took place in Sri Ramakrishna's life as a sadhaka. That is the subject matter for the second part of Sri Ramakrishna Leela Prasanga, which is also known as Sri Ramakrishna the Great Master. And more recently, Swami Chetanananda has retranslated, we may say, this book, which is also known as the Divine Play of Sri Ramakrishna and his Divine Play. The reason is the translation of the Bengali original title, that is Sri Sri Ramakrishna Leela Prasanga. Leela Prasanga can be translated into English as the Divine Play. The same book was translated earlier as Sri Ramakrishna the Great Master, which is not a very literal translation. But we will be using both these books. And now we will be discussing the second part of this book, which is the Sadhaka Bhava. In Bengali, it is Sadhak Bhava. That means Sri Ramakrishna as a spiritual aspirant. We discussed a lot about Sri Ramakrishna's life as a child, as a young boy, and now we come to his sadhanas, what exactly he did, what were the sadhanas he practiced, and normally they form part of his life from his 17th to the 40th year. So we'll try to see that though he began his sadhana at the age of 17, he had a lot of experiences when he was just a child. So we can regard this volume as a history of Sri Ramakrishna's life as a spiritual aspirant. You know, Leela Prasang has been divided into 5 parts. First is the Balya Bhava, that is his childhood life. And the second part is known as Sadhaka Bhava, which discusses his life as a spiritual aspirant just before his disciples, before the arrival of his disciples, Swami Vivekananda and other disciples who came to him, just before that, the sadhanas he did is covered in this chapter. So the author says, Swami Shardananji says that while writing this volume, he was afraid that he may not get all the dates of all the important events that took place in Sri Ramakrishna's life, because as the other disciples started coming only after he had completed his sadhana. So Swami Vivekananda and all the other disciples, as well as the monastic as well as the householder disciples, they started coming when he had almost finished his sadhana. So they were not witnesses to these wonderful events that took place. So they depended a lot, especially Swami Shardananji, because they had to verify and cross-verify all those incidents. So he had to depend on others who were present, who had seen him or who had lived with him in Dakshineshwar during the period of his sadhana. So we all know from the age of 17 up to the age of 40, he did intense sadhana, and the last 10 years, you can say, he freely distributed the spiritual treasures that he gathered as a result of his intense, unprecedented sadhana. He practiced sadhana according to almost all the major religious traditions and sects, not only of Hinduism, but also other religions as well. That is unique in the life of any spiritual, any prophet, or you can say a spiritual personality of this through the ages. It's not just in this age, but you'll never find in history a person who has successively practiced all the different sadhanas according to spiritual disciplines, according to the major traditions within Hinduism, within the bounds of Hinduism, as well as practiced Christianity, practiced a form of Islam which is known as Sufi Islam. And then he came to the conclusion, based on his own experiences, mind you. Nowadays, there's a lot of interfaith dialogue going on, that all religions, there is some kind of toleration which we can see as a result of this conversation between different faiths. But still, every faith believes that his faith or his way of worship or his religion alone can give salvation or can lead you to the highest. And that's why we see so much of quarrel in the name of religion. Very often, as Swami Vivekananda said, it's not religion alone, but when religion gets mixed up with politics, it becomes a very dangerous force. Because whenever politics mixes with religion, invariably this selfishness and these quarrels and fights and terrible wars have been the result. If you see the historical events as they unfolded, right from the, you may say, when the religious quest was seen in mankind, religious quest always began with an inquiry into the unknown. Everybody, no doubt how successful he is in this world, has to solve one question. He is seeking answers for one question. And that inspired the religious quest in all parts of the globe, whether it is Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. The idea that this world that we see around us, the Prakriti, the nature that we see around us, things are moving so fast that in the midst of all this change, human beings always sought something permanent. They were worried that all their effort, all the money that they earn, all the material wealth that they gather, what will happen after they die? No doubt they try to console themselves that maybe my descendants will enjoy that. That's fine. But still, the fact that you have to leave behind all these things, at least at the end of their lives, really, the people, human beings, realize that one cannot ignore the fact that we have to die one day. So this solution to the problem of death, when a child is young, obviously he doesn't think about that when he's unless one is like Nachiketa. He was just 14 years old in the famous Kathopanishad. He is asking his father, and he in fact goes to the king of death, Yamadeva himself, because he wants to know what happens to a person after death. Does he continue to live? What happens exactly? Or does everything end with death? If that is the case, then many of the things that human beings strive for, they would not do. But unfortunately, that is the great mystery which Yudhishthira said in the Mahabharata. Somebody, the voice which spoke to him said, "Tell me which is the greatest mystery in life." And Yudhishthira said, "Every day we see people dying around us, and yet we have a strange feeling that we are going to live eternally." That is the greatest mystery according to Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata. And that was the correct answer. So this quest to know what survives after the physical death. Some people say nothing survives, you either go to hell or you go to heaven. They also speak of salvation. But for many people, salvation means going either, depending on what you have done, it is God who gives you the judgment on the after you live your life, and after death, depending on your karma, depending on your deeds, you will either be sent to heaven or hell. There are many crude ideas of hell and many crude ideas of heaven. Even in Hinduism, you will find many of them, they believe in the so-called heavens and so-called hell, depending on what actions you have done throughout your life. So that is just to put some kind of fear. And it works in most of the cases, because at least that fear of the afterlife, or maybe fear of death and what happens to a person after death, makes him live a moral life. But that's not a very, very logical way to live our life. The eternal religion of Hinduism, which went further, they discovered this idea of moksha or mukti, which means freedom from all change, to attain to that changeless. That is what this young boy Nachiketa is asking Yama. That when he wanted to know that my father is doing all these rituals, he is perhaps thinking that by doing this he will go to heaven, is he deceiving himself? You see the wisdom of this young boy. He is questioning his father. He is asking him, are you sure all the effort that you are making, that the different sacrifices he was doing, the yagnas and all the rituals that he was performing, are you sure that it will take you to heaven? What is the nature of that heaven? Normally, people don't ask these questions. And this boy was asking his own father, who was like a guru, because he had learnt all the knowledge. But he was a very intelligent student. And he saw that something is wrong with this philosophy. My father is trying to reach heaven through these sacrifices, which he is in any case not doing it properly. So he was worried that where will my father go ultimately? What is the state he will reach? So he just points out some of the faults. For example, he was giving some gifts. One is enjoined according to the scriptures that when one does certain sacrifices, one has to give the gifts, whatever they possess. So he was giving gifts to the holy people, and he was giving cows which were not yielding milk. Some old decrepit cows, and he tells his father, see, you are giving a gift which will not be useful to the person who receives these gifts. Are you sure that this will take you to heaven? Maybe you might land up in hell. So this young boy had the courage to challenge his father, who was like a guru to him, and he said, Father, please think about this. And then his father gets angry. He was terribly angry. He said, who are you to question me? Who do you think you are? So then he presses him further. Then he says, you are giving all these possessions. At least give me as a gift to somebody. I'll be of some use to them, because I am an intelligent boy. I can do many things. If at all you want to give gifts, don't give these useless cows as gifts. They will suffer more. Instead of that, you please give me to somebody. So he really gets angry on his son for speaking the truth. Of course, he spoke the truth. So he curses his son. He said, I am going to give you to the Lord of death, to the God of death, Yama. That is a sort of curse. When you curse somebody, said, I'll give you to the Lord of death. And Nachiketa, surprisingly, is very happy. He said, exactly, that is what I want to, that is the place where I want to go, because I am fed up of all these rituals. I'll go to the king of death himself, because he is the only person who can tell me what happens to a person after death. So the truths of all these spiritual practices or sadhana is to find the secret of death. That is what motivated people right from the beginning of history. All religions, this mystery, this unsolvable, apparently it's an unsolvable mystery to most of the people. So most of the religious prophets, most of the religious pursuits in the world, it may belong to any part of the world, not only Hindus, but also the other religions. They try to find out a solution to this problem in their own way. They came to certain conclusions which more or less agree with each other with minor differences. So this boy, Nachiketa, goes to Yama and gets his answers. How to find the unchangeable, how to, if there is something known as eternal life, can I reach that state in this life itself? What is sadhana? What is spiritual? What are the spiritual practices that will enable me to solve the problem of death? That was his main question. And then the whole Upanishad describes Yama's answer to this young boy, who was obviously much more wiser than his own father. So here in Sri Ramakrishna's life also we'll find that this young boy who used to go to school but was not very keen to develop some kind of mastery in the bread-winning education. That is what he called. Bread-winning education means the education that will enable you to earn a small living, earn a job. He says, anyway, that is not the goal of my life. So his brother, we all know that Shudiram, his father, had passed away. So his elder brother thought that if he takes him to Calcutta, where he had started a school to train Brahmins for certain rituals so that he can earn a living, he is forced to go there. But there again, he was not interested in this ritualistic worship, no matter how much his elder brother tried to convince him that you at least learn these things. You have not gone to school when you are in the village, but at least when you have come to Calcutta, you study with the other students whom I am teaching so that you can earn a living. Maybe you can do some priestly work, can get a job somewhere, or you may go from house to house. In those days, that was one of the methods where Brahmins earned a living. They used to do pujas in different houses. The tradition is still there, but it has changed its nature over many centuries now. But in those days, it was a very important profession. And his brother thought that if I teach Ramakrishna Gadadhar, as he was known, some of these priestly duties, in future he can earn a living. Otherwise, he is going to starve. Now, his reaction, just as Nachiketa argued with his father, he told firmly his elder brother, who of course passes away. We'll see that in this volume. He tells him that I am not interested in this kind of knowledge. I want a knowledge which will solve all the problems of my life, and that will enable me to reach the goal of life, whatever that goal may be. The scriptures say that this is the goal, to realize God or to get mukti is the goal of life. So anything that helps me in that quest, I will follow. I don't want the knowledge that you want to teach me, which will enable me to earn a small salary. So that was the courage this young boy had, like Nachiketa, who like Nachiketa was ready to give up this effort to live a life in the world like an ordinary, to trivialize the goal, or to reduce the reduce the effort that one should make to a simple life which would help him earn a living in this world. So this volume, in the second volume, it describes the history of Sri Ramakrishna's life from the age of 17 till he reached the age of 40, when he did intense sadhanas. As I told you, different religious, that was his main pursuit. He wanted to realize how people of different sects, whether they are Vaishnavas, whether they are followers of Shiva, whether they are followers of Shakti. We know there are so many paths within the fold of Hinduism, and there is so much of confusion. People do not understand which path I should follow. People normally, naturally follow the path or the sect in which they are born. If somebody is born as a Vaishnava, naturally his tendency will be to worship Krishna. If he is born in a Shakta family, he will worship Devi. So that is how normally the birth in a particular family determines the path that you are going to take. But as time passed, people started losing faith. That's one of the reasons that Sri Ramakrishna was born, to revive faith in the people of India and also the whole world, so that their faith in the religious quest preached by their prophets, they get strengthened. So as Swami Vivekananda said, he came to make a Hindu a better Hindu, a Christian a better Christian, a Muslim a better Muslim. He found out that the essence of all religious quest is to solve this problem of eternal life, or solve the problem of death, which every religion aims at. Everybody wants to get rid of suffering. Buddha was more practical. Buddha said, don't bother about the existence of God or his philosophy. Philosophy is of no use. You all know that there is misery in this world, and that misery has to be solved. And according to him, according to Buddha, he says, I have found out the way. You try to find out how you can solve the problem of life, solve this misery. If you are unable to solve this, then your life is wasted. So Buddha considers nirvana to be the goal of life, which is same as mukti or salvation in Christianity. And Sri Ramakrishna practiced all these different religions, or the sadhana. He did his sadhana according to these different religious sects, just to show that everyone who is trying sincerely reaches the same goal of life, that is freedom from bondage, or freedom from the grip that the world has over us, that which makes us miserable, that which makes us weak, that which makes us helpless, that which imprisons us. We become the prisoners of destiny. The idea behind Vedanta and all other religions is, don't be a prisoner of the circumstances and the changing material universe around you, and be free. And only a life of spirit which is pure consciousness, which is beyond the material universe, can make you truly free and truly eternal. So, how to reach that eternal life, that immortality? It has different names: nirvana in Buddhism, mukti or moksha in Hinduism, and we have the word salvation in Christianity. So everywhere the names may change, but the goal is the same. And the paths may be different. That is why in Bengali, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Joto mat, toto path. Means as many paths, as many faiths, so many paths. You have your faith, and if you are sincere in your path, you will reach the goal. So will all the others. You don't have to keep quarreling and trying to find out which path is better. So that is the significance of studying the important events in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Because all the paths that he practiced had a significance. They were not just practiced because he wanted to do it. He wanted to show practically, not just theoretically. Many people, when they discuss the different paths, scholars, they'll say all the paths lead to the same goal. But have you traversed that path? Can you say, is it a conviction with you that this path leads to that same goal? So one has to experience the truth behind every path, and through experimental verification, just as a scientist will not take any hypothesis to be true unless he proves it in the laboratory, or maybe he proves through reasoning, that this hypothesis can be proved, and only after proof it becomes a theory. So also in the religious field, these theories, they are not just theories. All the sadhakas or all the prophets of the world who founded different religions, they had these experiences. They were not just saying and trying to convince people intellectually. They saw certain things, just as a scientist verifies certain things in the laboratory, not and reasons and then verifies. He doesn't propose some postulate or this thing, and he experimentally verifies it and says, now this has become a theory because we have seen that through repeated experiments, these truths can be established. So also, Swami Shardananji says, for Sri Ramakrishna, spiritual practice was nothing short of a spiritual laboratory. He didn't ask any of his followers to just believe. When Narendranath first went to him, he said, have you seen God? Have you experienced God? He was not, if somebody said, most of the other leaders, the Brahmo leaders and the others leader whom he approached, they said, yes, the scriptures say this, the scriptures say that. And Naren was not going to get convinced. He said, the scriptures may say, but have you seen that reality? Have you realized that reality? So Sri Ramakrishna was the first person who, on the basis or based on his own spiritual experiences, he said, yes, I had that experience. What realization is according to the different sects, because of his long practice from the 17th year to the 40th year of his life, he did nothing else but practice all these religious paths and come to the conclusion based on his own experience that these paths are true. Each of these paths are capable to take the aspirant to that highest level. And for that reason, the events of his life, they appear to be rather mysterious and complicated. How can a person, see, a normal human being, if you see, if he wants to succeed in any spiritual path, he has to, his Sri Ramakrishna's own guru, Advaitic guru, Totapuri, whose ashram was in Kurukshetra. He came, he struggled for 40 years to have that Advaitic realization of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. He himself said, it took me 40 years. And Sri Ramakrishna, just in 3 days of intense sadhana. So the author here asks this question, how could Sri Ramakrishna do this? How could he finish all these disciplines? So the answer he gives is, if one's intensity increases, in proportion to the intensity of one's quest, one can reach the goal. There's no limit. That's why Totapuri said, what took 40 years for me? Sri Ramakrishna, in that small kutia where he did his Vedantic sadhana, he accomplished in 3 days. So Swami Shardananji says, because Swami Shardananji, by profession, he was studying medicine, so he wanted to explain everything on the basis of reason. Even the mysterious and complicated states, spiritual states, or the experiences that Sri Ramakrishna realized, he wanted to give a very rational explanation to all this. So that's why he says, after thorough investigation into all this phenomena, this mystical phenomena, there is a wonderful book written by William James. When Swami Vivekananda went to America, he met one of the greatest philosophers of his day, William James, who after meeting Swamiji wrote a beautiful book, Varieties of Religious Experience, because that was a scientific age where everything was scrutinized. If somebody said, I have a mystic experience, people would not believe, because science had taught them, the spirit of science, which gave rise to all this material development which we see in the world, that had told them that everything has to be reasoned, tested, verified. And then only if it is verified many times, not just once, it may be an accident if somebody says, I've got a realization. That's why Swamiji says, if somebody tells me that, oh, only I will have this realization, or only my guru has this realization, or this person had a realization, it cannot occur again, then don't believe him. Because if it is scientific, if Newton was asked that will the law of gravity be true, after centuries also the same theory, the same principle works. So it cannot be that it will work for some people and it not work for other people. That's why Swami Shardananji says that unless one does a thorough investigation, we would not have been able to determine the real importance, and we would not have been able to verify the truth of all the different incidents that we heard from other people's mouth. Because Swami Shardananji was not a witness. They had not even come to Sri Ramakrishna before he reached 40. It was only in the last 5 or 6 years of his life that these disciples came. So they had to depend on others. Hriday was there. There were other people living in Dakshineshwar who narrated these incidents. Some of the incidents Sri Ramakrishna himself had mentioned. If you see the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you will find many times he says, I experienced this, I experienced. So all those things were there. But there were many incidents which appears to be so mysterious and complicated that Swami Shardanji says he took a lot of effort, cross-verifying, asking many people, did this incident really happen? Was this sadhana practiced? So when he was trying to compile these incidents, he says this is the most difficult part of Sri Ramakrishna's life, biography that he was writing, because he had to do a lot of investigation, cross-verification, different versions. Some of them were mentioned by Sri Ramakrishna himself or people who had lived with Sri Ramakrishna. So even the dates, many of the dates you will see, wherever he is doubtful, as a true scientist would, he'll say these dates are uncertain, because nobody kept a diary or anything. So these dates were, sometimes it was guesswork, but they would mention this. Swami Shardananji was so particular that if he did not know the date, he said, maybe this happened during these months. He would not just give a date and write the biography. So he says, till now means now he's talking about the first part of the book where Sri Ramakrishna's birth is described. He says, till now the date and year of Sri Ramakrishna's birth itself was controversial, because as Sri Ramakrishna himself had told them that his original horoscope had been lost. And later a new one was made, but it was full of errors. But Swami Shardananji says they were able to settle the problem. He did a lot of research by consulting several almanacs, more than 100 years old, just trying to find out, which helped us to ascertain the dates of many of the events in Master's life. So there were many incidents whose dates were not known, and there were many versions. So he took a lot of effort. That just shows how minutely Swami Shardananji has worked for years together to put this, to describe the events of the second part, the sadhanas of Sri Ramakrishna's life. The third and fourth part, most of the incidents were witnessed by his Guru Bhai, Swami Vivekananda, and all the other monastic disciples and householder disciples, most of them were alive. So it was easy for him to write the third and fourth volume, which is known as Guru Bhav Purvardha and Guru Bhav Uttarardha. Guru Bhav means after his sadhana, the last nearly 9 to 10 years of his life, he wanted to distribute that knowledge, that experiences that he had with the world, and people started coming to him. Some of the householder disciples came first, then the would-be monastic disciples. Of course, most of them took monastic vows after Sri Ramakrishna passed away, though he himself had identified some of his disciples, 16 disciples, who ultimately became monks. Swami Vivekananda was the leader, but these 10 years, some of them came very late. Some of them, like Swami Vijnanananda, they came almost before his Mahasamadhi in 84. And the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which we discuss on every alternate Sunday, it covers a period from February 1882 to 1886 when Sri Ramakrishna passed away. So it's just a record of 4 years, conversations that took place, but they're very accurate because they were recorded by M, and M, who was known as Mahendranath Gupta, who was present. And he says there's not a single incident or conversation that has been recorded in the gospel in which he was not present. A few incidents are there which he heard from very authentic people, but he has avoided mentioning those. Only a few incidents or conversations you will find where M or Master Mahasaya was not present. So, all the facts that concern this period of his life, though Swami Shardanandji and others were not witness to these events, they used horoscopes, they used all the different, tried to find out the different dates, so we can imagine how difficult it was, but at the same time how valuable it is to get these facts correct. Now, Swami Shardanandji begins by asking a question. What is the necessity of discussing spiritual practice? Is it not enough just to study the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna? Because that is what he told his disciples. Should we not be happy with the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna? Why discuss? First of all, why write this book? It's such a monumental book. Why write this book in the first place? And what is the necessity of discussing the spiritual practices of an avatara? A person who is a prophet, people may say, we are ordinary people, we are having so many problems, we are just people of the world having so many things. What will the spiritual practices of an avatara, why will it benefit us? Can we learn anything from them? Suppose somebody says, Buddha did this, he did this sadhana, he did that. So only Buddha's teachings are important, but not the spiritual practices he did. Because most of the spiritual practices, if you see the life of Buddha, unfortunately nobody has recorded them in minute detail. Whereas here we had the advantage of some of the disciples who were wonderful stenographers. In those days, most of the disciples, including Swami Vivekananda's disciple Goodwin, Josiah Goodwin, who met him in America but who traveled with him throughout in England and all Europe and also in India, he recorded verbatim. He was a wonderful stenographer. So that stenographic accuracy of what was recorded, you will find in Sri Ramakrishna's biography also. That is why all the details of the spiritual practices of his, he says, are recorded, verified, cross-verified. And he begins this chapter by saying, with the exception of Buddha and Chaitanya, they are historical people. He says there are very few accounts of the avatara spiritual practices. Say Ramachandra, Rama, Sri Rama, Sri Krishna. We know about their exploits. We know about their wonderful stories that you find in the Bhagavata and other things. But hardly you will find anywhere, what did Sri Krishna do? How did he conduct his spiritual practices? So there is no detailed account except Buddha and Chaitanya. In case of Buddha, you will find his spiritual quest. The day he left his palace, he had a small child, Rohit, and suddenly the circumstances that led to Buddha's leaving for the forest with his charioteer. And then we know at least there are many incidents which have been recorded. And also Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whose life was recorded by some of the eyewitnesses. So Swami Shardanji says most of the incarnations or the great spiritual teachers of the world, we hardly know, there are no detailed accounts of these the spiritual practices of these great prophets. So in all the life stories, we cannot find a detailed description of their passion, their zeal, that struggle to attain the truth, or how they were carried away in their journeys by hope and hopelessness, fear and awe, joy and longing. So the question may be asked, did they also experience the same passion, the same struggle? Did they also struggle like we people? How did their minds function? If that is not the case, then what can we learn from these people? They also showed in their life. That's why he continues, Swami Shardanji says, there is a human side to an incarnation. Even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Buddha, they also were human beings. They behaved like human beings. They may be far superior than the normal human beings, but the struggle that they undertook, or the struggle that they had to face when they did their spiritual sadhana, they can be inspiring to people now. Said they were also human like us. They also were born. In fact, so in the gospel we find that when when Sita was taken away, Rama also wept like any other person who has lost his wife. He was also, Lakshmana had to console him. And then he said, no, we'll try to find out. But he was like an ordinary husband or an ordinary human being. He also started weeping. So it's not that the incarnations or the great religious teachers, they don't suffer. They suffer. So the point he wants to make, Swami Shardananji, is that these people come to show how, in spite of all the struggle, in spite of all the trouble that a person encounters in his life, he has to keep his mind steady and focus it on the spiritual reality. That is the main intention of describing this spiritual practices of these great people. How they maintained stability in their life, how they held on to the God, or to how they held on to the spirit when everything around them was changing. The hopes and the hopelessness that they felt, the fear, they also had their own fears. They had their own joys. Sometimes they were elated. Sometimes you will find Sri Ramakrishna in terrible depression. But of course, that depression was not because he didn't have money or something like that. The depression was because he could not realize the truth. So he used to get terribly upset sometimes. So much so that he, once or twice, he says that even I felt like committing suicide. So these are the emotions which normal human beings feel, but these great prophets are no exception. They also struggle. So in fact, that serves a purpose. People who are trying to do sadhana, they can get some inspiration that even incarnations had to suffer. Even they had to struggle like we are doing. And if they could find a solution, if we follow their footsteps, even we can solve the problems of our life. So, Swami Shardanji says, there is a cause and effect relationship between the sadhana that these incarnations did and the amazing actions they performed in the latter part of their lives. It was not without tremendous effort that they got all the spiritual fruits which they were able to distribute to others. So when somebody asked Sri Ramakrishna, because he never went to school, so somebody asked him, you were not even capable of reading a book. How do you remember so many incidents from so many scriptures? So Sri Ramakrishna gives a wonderful idea of how his education, what type of education he said. I might not have read. Reading and writing was not his. I mean, he did not learn to read and write fluently as other students did. But then he said something very significant. He said, I might not have read these books, but how much have I heard? So he used the traditional uh, Indian way of learning things by hearing. So the cause and effect that we see, how they managed to learn all these great truths. These ideas did not just fall from heavens, as people might like to think. Of course, he is a great spiritual leader. For them, it's very easy. No, they also had to struggle. They also had to do the sadhana. That is the purpose behind the behind writing this part. So Shardanji makes it very clear that don't think this sadhana part of his life is not very important. It's important because it shows how in a similar situation we can benefit from their examples. Even from ordinary people, he says, in ordinary lives, we can benefit from somebody else's mistakes. Swamiji says, I learnt many things from others' mistakes or even my own mistakes. So, everything, if one keeps one's ears and eyes open, as Sri Ramakrishna did, he was learning every moment of his life. Swami Vivekananda said he went to a university which was most original because he went to nature. Prakriti taught him everything. He learned by his keen observation, keen sense of observation. It was not that he was, because he didn't go to school, he could not learn. Swamiji says, in fact, our knowledge is second hand because we learned in our university and in our schools, we learned what was already written. It's a second hand knowledge. Thoughts of others we had to memorize and appear in our exams. There was hardly anything original that we learned. Whereas for Sri Ramakrishna, he didn't have to go to these books and universities to learn. For him, every moment, every second of his life was like a schooling. So he heard, he saw with his own eyes. That's why you see in the gospel the wonderful examples that he gives from our day-to-day life to explain these difficult philosophical problems. So, but he says this difficulty, this attempt which he made, Swami Shardananji made, he says, we are lucky because it is now, if we consider the other incarnations, it's not very clear, he says, how Krishna, who was a darling of the gopis of Vrindavan, was transformed into the Krishna of Dwaraka and the reviver of religion. That phase nobody knows. We all know what happened when he was hardly 12 to 13 years old. He lived in Vrindavan and most of these gopis were so devoted to him. But we also know that he left Vrindavan and never came back. And suddenly you will find the same Krishna was in Vrindavan, a young boy. There is such a gap in his life. Suddenly you find that Krishna in Dwaraka, who was engaging later on in that ferocious Mahabharata war. So what transformed the Krishna of Vrindavan or the Gokula, the small Gopala? What kind of sadhana he did? How did he suddenly become the Krishna of Dwaraka who revived religion? There are so many gaps. We know the incidents of their attainments. The effect is known, but what was the cause? We know a little bit that he went to Sandipani school. He received education with his friend Sudama, who was a very poor person. So all these things are their part. There is some mention here and there of Krishna's schooling, Krishna's sadhana, but mostly the focus is on his exploits. How he killed Jarasandha even as a boy and many other people. So no doubt one can meditate on his exploits, but it would have been better if we knew how Sri Krishna struggled to acquire knowledge. How did he practice? What kind of sadhana did he do? Who were his gurus? So all these things are important. So also he says, only a few episodes are known about the great life of Jesus because he was writing this book for the Western people also. He says there is such a gap. People know what Jesus did after he became a prophet. So there is hardly any history before Jesus reached the age of 30. Leave alone his childhood life, there is hardly any mention anywhere in the world. Even in Shankara's case, some incidents are there, Shankaracharya, of his childhood, where he took sannyasa and before he reached the age of 16, he had mastered so many scriptures. There are some descriptions, but there's no detailed description of what type of spiritual practice they did. So also Swami Shardananji says with all the other avatars. So one of the reasons he says that everybody, suppose somebody likes Sri Krishna, or somebody has Sri Krishna as an Ishta, or somebody has Sri Rama as an Ishta. He says devotees don't like those who are fanatically devoted to their Lord. They don't want to even think that their teachers were ever imperfect. They want to try to read only those portions where the supernatural attainments, the great events that took place in their Ishta or the Lord or the God in whom they believe. They want to discuss only that portion. How can my Ishta, how can Krishna be ordinary? How can he be like any other sadhaka trying to do sadhana and then attain what he attained? So the reason he says most of the details were, even if they were recorded, they were removed by these bhaktas because of their excessive devotion. So, but here Swami Shardananji says that we have done a very honest attempt. Unlike the devotees of other, say Krishna and other Christ and all, he says devotees were hesitant to attribute any human imperfection to a divine character. They said he is divine, but he is the Lord himself. So we should not be finding faults. It is sacrilege to do that. So they wanted to remove those portions. But Swami Shardananji says, why should you do that? They were born as human beings. When they take an avatar, his idea was, they will be born with problems similar to what other human beings face. But they struggle and they try to find a solution, whereas we succumb to the problems. We are not successful. So, unless the incarnation exhibits human characteristics like us, we can't benefit from their sadhana, the examples that they set. So, the devotees, in trying to protect the divinity of their Ishta or the Lord, they removed all these incidents. That's what Swami Shardananji is saying, that they did not give importance. Said, how can we consider our Lord to have these defects? Or they thought perhaps if we show the positive side only, the perfect characters of these great souls, if we show that, that will be an inspiration to attract them to these incarnations. But they didn't realize that how did they achieve that greatness? What superhuman efforts they undertook. Like we see in Buddha's case, how much he had to struggle. He left his family, left his small child and a wonderful palace where he lived. And one night he just walks, then passes through forests, and so much of sadhana you find in Buddha's life. So none of the followers of Buddha, though they tried very hard not to show him as a ordinary sadhaka, they wanted to put Buddha on a high pedestal. That is what Swamiji said. I don't want to preach Sri Ramakrishna like that in the West. When somebody asked him, why didn't you preach Sri Ramakrishna? He said, I don't want to do it. The ideals they followed are more important. If I say he is an avatara, is an incarnation, then people will maintain a distance. Oh, he is an incarnation. It was possible for Krishna, but we are ordinary people. How can we attain those things? So, the devotees, Swami Shardananji says, considered it unnecessary to record the detailed account of the spiritual practices of these avatars. So that is why he says one of the reasons that devotees always want to see their masters as perfect. Even though their masters, their ishtas have assumed human bodies, that the devotees never like to admit that they have experienced any human weakness or lack of insight or power. And they struggle to overcome that and then achieved success. So they are always eager, as it happens with most of the gurus that we see, that we want something miraculous. Devotees, he says, Swami Shardanji says, are always eager to hear of the miraculous events like Krishna, like Yashoda saw the whole universe in the mouth of baby Krishna. So these supernatural events attract them. They don't expect, they not only expect to find mature intelligence and vast experience in their masters' irrelevant childhood activities. Even though he is a child, he is supernatural. That's fine. They have that faith, that's why they want to see their Lord great right from childhood. But at the same time, they don't try to understand that it is the human aspect that is more important, the universal love, the kindness. So all these wonderful things, these children, in children who were later on, these children, divine children, who later on became great incarnations, the devotees are not so much concerned in their human activity, how they behaved with other people, how they set an example, how did they treat their relatives, their friends. So this human side has been neglected. Only the miraculous side has been emphasized. As a result, that people cannot identify with these incarnations. They don't understand that the human side of an incarnation is as important and relevant than the divine aspect. And the spiritual practices that they did, the struggles that they underwent, how they ate, how they walked, that is why Arjuna is asking Sri Krishna. When Sri Krishna in the second chapter explained to Arjuna that this is the Lakshana, these are the signs of a Sthita Prajna. Then he asks, Arjuna asks Sri Krishna, how does such a person walk? How does he behave? He is very keen to know that suppose tomorrow somebody becomes a Sthita Prajna, will he be different? Will he behave differently than other people? These are relevant questions which every human being wants to ask. What was in Krishna? What was there in Sri Ramakrishna? What was there in Swami Vivekananda, which we can benefit from, which we can use as an inspiration in our own lives? How is it relevant to me? If we just focus on the miracles of these incarnations, we will not gain anything. That's why Swami Vivekananda advised Swami Shardananda and all others who were writing his biography to avoid all miracles. Said miracles are not an important part of an incarnation. They just distract the people. It is the patience, it is the faith, it is the unselfishness, it is the human characteristics of an incarnation that can inspire us in our struggle in our daily life. It becomes relevant for us, and not the miracles, not how we killed a Rakshasa or how we defeated so many people. These are good stories for children. They're fine. People will be inspired that these are the activities, and it's some kind of entertainment. But how, as a human being, can I benefit? Whether Rama killed Ravana or somebody else, how will it benefit? I am not going to face Ravana, or I am not going to expect that these exploits I can do in my life. What is more important is how can I lead my daily life? How can I go about my daily routine work that I do in my profession? So how does Krishna's life help me? How does Rama's life help me in doing my duties well, as much as far as possible? That is more important. That is why these biographies are written with the aim that these incidents, how they handled the situations, complex situations. Mahabharata was a very complex situation where so many people were quarreling, brothers came as rivals, there was a great battlefield. So Sri Krishna's, how he handled that, how he advised Arjuna to handle the problems. These are the problems that we face at a smaller level. At our own level, we also face these battles in our day-to-day life. And how Sri Krishna handles them through his message of the Bhagavad Gita and also his own life. That is why Swami Vivekananda said it's not enough to read the message or the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita has to be read in the context of Sri Krishna's own life. It was his life that was a commentary on the Gita that he uttered. He lived, every verse of the Gita was lived by Sri Krishna, and he demonstrated that. So those incidents should be emphasized. If he speaks of non-attachment, if he speaks of renunciation, he speaks of bhakti, he speaks of strength, he speaks of many things in the Gita, then you will find that everything that he tells, he has practiced in his own life. That is the inspiration. That is why when we read the great master, the next class, that is the alternate class, is on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So we have always, we try here in our sessions here to discuss the message as well as his life. Because the message, if it is understood in the context of the life of the incarnation, then we can see that the message was given based on his own experiences. And that helps us in our own day-to-day life. So, the time is over. I'll just see if there is a question. Otherwise, we will continue next Sunday. Yes. So, somebody has given a link to Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master. Yes, all these books are available now free of cost because the copyright has expired. So, all of these books we have on PDF form. If somebody wants, you can request. We can easily send it. It's not a big issue. All these books are available in PDF form. So, there's one more question. Let me just quickly answer and then we'll conclude. The law of cause and effect applies to even incarnations. Yet, the cause is generally ignored because it highlights the struggle or temporary weaknesses human side. But in sports culture universally, the struggle, sweat, and toil is glorified, and people get inspired enough to practice hard. How to change this attitude? Yes, the same attitude should be there in the, it's what is true in sports is true in spiritual life also. When somebody was praising Ravi Shankar, he gave a wonderful performance in the West. Then somebody praised because of the control which he had with the sitar that he was playing, and everybody went on praising. He said, see, you are praising my performance now, but do you know what has gone behind this performance? How much struggle when I first started sitar, and the hours and hours and the hard labor I had to do to play sitar like this. People don't appreciate that. Yeah, that is true. In spiritual life, more so in spiritual life. In spiritual life, it is the struggles of, that is why Swami Shardanji says, I spent so much time trying to find out what are the struggles. How does a incarnation or these great people, even Swami Vivekananda said that to his Western audience, he said, if you want to know the greatness of a person, see how he does his daily activities. See how he struggles. See how he overcomes the problems that he faces. These are the small things which Swami Shardanji has recorded. So just as sports people, of course, nowadays people emphasize that. Whenever you ask a great sportsman, they'll say how they became great football icons. How much of practice, when everybody was enjoying, they were practicing in the fields. They were going on practicing. So that struggle is very important, but people just see the effect, not the cause. So that's exactly why these biographies are written, so that the cause is given more importance than the effect. It's easy to praise anybody's glory, as that gentleman was praising Ravi Shankar's beautiful sitar vadans, or he was playing the sitar so beautifully. He said, but try to see how many years of struggle has resulted in this. So that's fine. Yes. So there is one more question and I will if we talk about struggling or anticipating struggle, then people say we don't, oh, don't be negative. Yes, that is very common. Everybody wants a comfortable religion. That is why Swamiji says, if you tell them religion is all struggle, then nobody will come. But if you say religion means you don't have to do anything, just offer a little oil to Hanuman or somebody and all your problems will be solved. That is a comfortable religion, but it doesn't work that way. The comfortable religion ends up in misery or ends up, it never succeeds. Every effort has been made by the priestcraft to convince people that religion can be easy. And that is why people have lost faith in religion. They'll say, do this, wear this ring and do this havan, and then Vastu Shastra, do that, and your house, all the things will be smooth. And people are earning millions and millions of rupees. That has itself become a great business. I agree. But if you tell them that if you want something in life, you have to work hard, people will not come to you. Because if you tell the truth that every success in life, whether it is material success or spiritual success, requires hard work, then people will often be discouraged and they say, don't tell us the negative side. But there is no result without hard work. Even before exam, some of the children, parents bring their children to the temples. That is when they remember the temples and other religious places. Said, please bless him so that he gets good marks. If that was so easy, then nobody would have had to study. But if you tell them nothing will happen by the blessings of any god or goddess unless the child studies, if that truth is told, then there is a problem because they think, oh, it is so difficult to make them study. So this is true in all the activities that we do, whether for material success or spiritual success, that there is no substitute for hard work. That is exactly the reason why this human side of Sri Ramakrishna has been discussed. So we'll take your leave now. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.